Joining us from our Abuja studio is Dr. Biodun Adeniyi. He is the Associate Professor and Head of Mass Communications at BAZE University in Abuja. Good morning to you, Dr. Biodun. Can you hear me? He can. Good morning.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you very well. Right. Good morning, Adefemi, Ngozi, and Keturah.
Good morning. Good morning. Always a pleasure to have you join us on the morning show. Let's begin this way. I mean, so much has been happening almost at a dizzying speed. Let's begin with, the federal government's financial intervention to help curb the impact of the coronavirus outbreak. 1.1 trillion naira released by the central bank, an additional 50 billion. And you have an aviation sector that is suffering seriously, losing about 100 million naira every day. And there are chances that about 22 or so thousand staff, both direct and indirect, could lose their jobs if nothing happens, very, very quickly. Now, talk to us about your thoughts about some of the interventions the government has been putting in place.
Yeah, Ngozi, I think those interventions are okay. That's what governments around the world are doing, and that's what any responsible government should in fact do, These are dark times. These are times of irregular economic flow, and such times need stimulus packages, so as to reflect the economy, to keep it afloat, and to prevent it from sinking, as it can be this time. So government is right with those interventions, but it is one thing for us to announce interventions, and it's another thing for those funds to be properly delivered and administered. From our own experience in this in our own situation, what we witness most of the time is misappropriation, misapplication. We just hope that all hands will be on deck and individuals involved in the administration of these funds will realize that this is not the time for self-aggrandizement. This is the time to prioritize the interest of the community above the self, And we have also made the point that, with the kind of crisis, the coronavirus crisis that we have in our hands, we need to be concerned about re-strategizing, about, creating a different kind of communication pattern, not one that is focused, that is essentially focused on the curative aspect, where it is good that state governments, governments at the national and the subnational level are concerned about isolation centers, that they are concerned about treating people and ensuring that we lower the number of deaths. But this is curative, really. What about the preventive aspect of it, which this kind of disease actually requires at this time? We have a disease in our hands that does not have a known cure just yet. We're in a period of experiment. Trials are being made here and there. So prevention should actually be the main thing we should be focusing on now. And how do we prevent this? By education, by creating awareness, by sensitizing the populace. I dare say that, the level of ignorance in the land around this crisis is still very deadly, if not suicidal, and if enough education, enough attempt is not brought about to bring about understanding, to enable understanding among the citizenry, we don't want a situation where where Nigeria will become the epicenter of the crisis. So at the preventive level, we need more education, more awareness, People still believe that this thing is a myth, that is a white man's disease, it's something that cannot happen to them. If they resort to some local medication, some kind of drinks, they will be able to solve the problem. These are suicidal thoughts and understanding that needs to be attacked, and how do we attack it? The point is not just to concentrate on, traditional media, television, radio. These ones are good. The attempt so far is very good, but we need to go beyond that and focus on what we ordinarily call the below the line. What about use of posters? What about word of mouth? What about direct campaign in the marketplaces and in the homesteads? So that people can begin to understand that, it's not a joke that we are not in for a joke. We have a serious crisis in our hands, and they need this kind of understanding. We can also use community leaders, religious leaders, to educate the people, because this understanding is very, very necessary. And we have made the point that Nigeria is a populous country, and we are health infrastructure is suspect, and if there's an outbreak, a major outbreak in this place, we're going to find it difficult to cope. But that's why I think that education should be the creation of awareness, sensitization, should be focused on. And that's what I think, government should particularly fund, probably through the Ministry of Education or through the NOA, or even through individuals, private organizations, because this is a time for integrative and community effort, not individualized, and, unsystematized process of resolving the crisis, Ngozi.
Well, Dr. Adeniyi, if we were to take a look at the fact that within the space of a few days, the number of contact cases has jumped considerably. For a long time, we were talking about 1,300, and then that jumped to 1,800. And the latest number that we know is more than 4,000 cases, suspected contact cases, that the authorities are trying to track down. How comfortable are you with the numbers of cases that we have at the minute? Do you think they are accurate? Do you think the government has been transparent? Or do you think the actual number is far greater than any of us are aware of?
Yeah, Adefemi, I think it's just very clear that the number we have now, 97, is just a far cry from what the reality probably is. I think people are still afraid that they might be stigmatized. People are seeing this crisis as a personal thing. They're not yet confident to come out and accept it, that they have it, And if anybody comes out, really, I'm not sure anybody will want to see it as a letdown, because it's not something that is self-inflicted. It's a global affliction, and we have seen transparency being expressed in some of the most civilized parts of the world. The prime ministers have been infected, royals have been infected. And of course, we have seen also in this country where some governors have been very transparent, and they have come out to say, yes, they have been infected, But it's unfortunate that even at the highest level of governance, we are being told that an aide of the president. By the way, what is the meaning of an aide of the president? I believe that if there had been transparency from that center, it would go a long way towards believing in the leadership, that they are very open about pronouncements, But when we begin to hide, like we tend to do in this country, people will also begin to suspect, and it will further create the problem of distrust, a problem, it will probably increase the deficit that exists between the leaders and the led in this part of the world. And that's not what we need at this time. So that's why a lot of people believe, and I do believe too, that we'll have much more than the numbers so far declared, because we have problem with testing, we have problem with tracing. Our addressing system in this country is, the questions can still be asked around it. Lagos State government is being very exemplary in doing their best. But of course, we know Lagos State government is just a sub-national level. They cannot do it alone, but they have done their best so far, and we cannot but, commend them. And that's why they have also said very interestingly, and very commendably as well, that their projection is 39,000, and they are working towards it. So we know, we cannot take it for granted. We know definitely that we'll have more than 97. But how do we trace these people? People still lack this understanding. They still think that it's a personal thing. It's a thing that people will stigmatize them with. And that's why we're talking about education, awareness, conscientization, so that people will begin to think away from some of those myths, some of those deep-seated beliefs that ordinarily affect us in this part of the world. It's a virus that is threatening humanity, and it's one virus that is threatening something that is innate to mankind. The human being is naturally created, to socialize, but that natural tendency of the human being is being attacked, through preachments around social distancing.
Absolutely correct.
We understand
Dr.
it, we appreciate it, that it's probably a solution.
Associate Professor and Head of Mass Communication at BAZE University. Thank you for joining us. It is now time for a short break on the morning show, but when we come back, we will be staying with Dr. Adeniyi to discuss the further things that have taken place throughout the course of the week.
Yes, indeed.
Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Now we are still joined in studio by Dr. Biodun Adeniyi. He is the Associate Professor and Head of Mass Communication at BAZE University in Abuja. Thank you very much for staying with us, Dr. Adeniyi. Now, one wonders if the monetary intervention from the Central Bank of Nigeria was necessary. In fact, there are a lot of critics stating that although necessary, the government needs to do more. They're stating that the informal sector accounts for 41% of the Nigerian, or at least local, populace. So these people's main concern is not the virus, but food, how they're going to eat on a day-to-day basis. And right now, when they're being asked to stay home for 14 days at a time, it's almost insurmountable as to how it is that they're going to eat for the end of this month. What sort of measures and actions do you believe the government should be taking outside of these economic stimulus packages that have been passed?
Yes, Ketura, like I said earlier, the palliatives, the interventions are very okay. And that's what any responsible government should do these times, because economic activities have been paralyzed, and the virus is more like a vampire, that wants to eat deep into the very, very fabric of economic activities in the land, And when we have this kind of situation, who are those that are going to be most affected? We are talking about the urban poor and the rural poor as well, eventually. But in the circumstance, we are still to be concerned about the urban poor, and if you impoverish them, if you immiserate them further, you know what to expect. There will be a rise in crime and criminal acts, and it will make all of us probably unsafe and probably worsen the situation. So government intervening is actually in the right direction. And of course, private sector too, they play a lot of role in stimulating the system. They've all probably shut down now or closed down. Some kind of intervention will have to be needed. Will have to be required to get them still above, to get them so that they can keep their head above the water and not sink. So government's intervention is right in all of these directions, so that private sector will not resort to sack, which will again create problem for the system. But more especially for those populating the informal economy that you refer to, some direct interventions can be made. Again, Lagos State government, as we talked about food banks, that's not out of place, but of course we know that these solutions, they also have their own problems, because implementation is always the problem with some of these policies. At the end of the day, you see crowd of people milling around the food. You still see people trying to undercut, cheat each other, pack as much as possible, and stock their houses while some people don't have. All these problems will arise, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't actually devise or come about a solution. So direct interventions can be made. So in the United States, for instance, monies are being paid, directly to workers, to their accounts and all of that. And people have also talked about the number of people owning accounts, and some amount of money should be paid directly into their account. Well, that could have its own problem as well. But I think that if we're really conscientious about some of these things, we can actually identify those that are actually in need. The Vice President the other day gave 10,000 each to some sets of people, or 5,000 as it were. There was a channel with which it was done. We can replicate that as well, just to alleviate the plight of the urban poor, and eventually the rural poor, who are most likely to feel the pinch of this crisis, because like I already identified, their survival is likely dependent on everyday activity. And when those activities are shut out, when they are prevented from those activities, how will they feed? This should actually concern the government. And I think the government is rightly, as it appears, working in those directions. But again, it shouldn't just be a PR matter. Delivery has to be very important too.
Yes, Dr.
Yes.
Adeniyi, that's why some top government officials, including former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, is actually suggesting that 10,000 naira should be given to every Nigerian. But let's even talk about...
How far will 10,000 naira go? Well, when they make these announcements, are they really thinking?
That's an interesting question, but we'll see. I mean, countries like the United States are giving out $1,000 for the next 2 months.
Minimum. Yes, married couples are getting 2,400. If you think about the minimum wage salary, that's far above it. What is 10,000 naira? It's not even 10% of the minimum wage in Nigeria.
Exactly what my points. Now let's talk about the private sector donation and this interesting one by ministers, all 43 or so ministers actually giving their 50% of their March salaries. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a good one? Because it looks like all Nigerians are actually, like we always say, putting their every hand on deck in the fight against COVID-19. Yes.
Yeah, that's all right. I think the private sector intervention, the billion naira each from some of these successful businessmen is quite okay, and one of them donated 5 billion, some of them materials. This is also what we expect from people who have been blessed, and for them to come up at this time, it's actually commendable. But again, we know what can happen in this kind of system. We don't want at the end of the day, EFCC or ICPC will start telling us, will now be revealing to us how these monies were wrongly spent, We do not want that to happen. We want proper use of these resources to tackle the life and death situation that is right before us. If these monies are properly applied, I think it will go a long way in helping the government. And of course, there's an argument amongst you there, right argument, no doubt, whether 10,000 naira will be okay. But I think it's also okay to just start from somewhere. Let's not just leave these poor people just like that. And for the ministers, well, I think what we need from them, we want to thank them for their widow's mite. It's also good, more like a PR stunt. Even if it is not, we want to thank them. It's also all right. But we need more. We need leadership more from them at this time, really. What we need from them is leadership. We know that they all have their different portfolios, and the one that is on the spot at the moment is the Minister of Health. He has not done badly thus far, but the ministers can also rally around him so that with some of those things that we need done are done. We need more testing centers. We need more people tested. We need more people adhering to isolation, to quarantining. We need more sensitization, more awareness. And that's why all of them at this moment should just be ministers, maybe assistant ministers or deputy ministers of health, supporting the health ministry in the fight against this crisis. So it's not about their donating. We know if we add everything they're going to donate as ministers, near about 40 of them, everything will just be about 15 or 20 million. Well, it's a widow's mite, good effort on their part. We thank them, we salute them. But what we need more from them now is leadership, supporting the health ministry so that we can deliver the goods, proverbially, at the level of, fighting this invisible enemy called COVID-19.
Indeed. Now, Professor Adeniyi, let's shift gears ever so slightly to what is almost akin to a movie plot. The plot has thickened, and we're talking about Sowore and his allegation that the Buhari regime is planning to not only rearrest him and put him back in prison, but also to infect him with COVID-19. It reads like a movie script, if nothing else. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Oh yeah, Ketura, if Sowore's claim is right, if it has any tinge of reality, by all means, it's obviously condemnable. We hope that's not the truth. We haven't heard from the other side. We haven't heard from the side of government. But if eventually we hear from them, whatever it is, and it's directly or indirectly validates Sowore's expressed fears, we will just say that it's just going to be another return to those days when we're not happy, when he was detained endlessly, irrespective of court judgments and all of that, But again, we know who Sowore is. He's an activist, no doubt a patriot, because he wants his country to be better than it is, even though some of us have problem with his strategy, but that's who he is. We can't change him at this time. He has expressed his fear. Government should intervene by explaining, probably allaying his fears that nothing like that will be done. And this is not a banana republic. This is not a military junta. you know, in its natural form. This is not a Abacha time when somebody was reportedly injected to death, you know, and some other kinds of things were done to kill people, you know, allegedly though, you know, but this is a democracy, and we do not want to imagine that what Soros said will happen, you know, eventually happens to him. God forbid, we do not expect these things to happen, but these are just beliefs, these are just wishes, you know. Wishes are ordinarily not horses, but we need explanations, clarifications from the side of government, you know, to debunk, you know, some of these claims and to allay his fears that government is not interested in doing such things, even though, you know, even though we expect them not to feel that they are being put on the defensive. Yeah. There's nothing like being put on the defensive in the matter of governance. It's just about clarification, you know, providing explanation, really.
Okay, and you'll be wondering whether we don't have enough problems on our
Absolutely,
hands.
but some of these democracies are autocracies masking themselves as democracies. We won't mention Nigeria by name, but if you look at places like Turkey, places like Russia, where we have seen injection by death take place, especially amongst journalists. Anyway, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today, Dr. Biodun Adeniyi.